Welcome to Book Divas, the online book community for the young and young at heart. We are excited to be here today with David Gilbert, author of the new book, End Sons, published by Random House. End Sons was named one of the best books of the year by the Washington Post, the New Yorker, the Austin Chronicle, and more. We're excited to be here with you, David. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
We're also here with Book Divas editor, Valerie Salazar. Valerie is going to ask David our questions today. So, Valerie, take it away.
Thank you again. We appreciate you writing that book, End Sons, and, of course, taking the time to join us here today with our interview. My first question for you, David, is how did you come up with the idea to write a novel about the relationship between a father and his son? You wanted to add to it. Was it a personal experience or something you can relate to that inspired the story?
Well, I have a son myself who's 12 years old, and then my father is now 80. And so, I've kind of been seeing my son get older and becoming kind of more of a young man, I guess, and I've seen my father kind of get older and becoming more fragile and more vulnerable. And so it's kind of, that was definitely on my mind because I was in the middle of that. And my father was always kind of an unknowable guy growing up, and so I kind of wanted I wanted to explore that relationship of, what if your father were so knowable on the page, but across from you at the dinner table was totally violent. So that was kind of the inspiration for the book, to kind of explore those relationships where, for so long nothing is said, and try to kind of get underneath the silence of that. And my father, was kind of an impressive guy. And I remember once I was at some event, and he had to give a little toast, and he stood up and he just spoke beautifully. And I was sitting next to an old friend of his who turned to me and said, it's just so shocking to see your dad perform so well, because when he was younger, he could barely look you in the eye. He was so shy. He was so kind of, he couldn't even speak without a slight stutter. And so that kind of also made me think of, what if I could meet my father when he was, a young man at his most vulnerable age, like 17? How would your impressions of that kind of character change? So that also was kind of the inspiration to do End Sons the way I did it.
And would you, David, say that there's possibly a dysfunctional relationship between the father and his son in the novel?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I mean, those are kind of the most fun relationships to write about. I mean, it's like if it's a perfectly happy family, it gets a little just not as exciting. But yeah, so it's this relationship in which, all the ways that healthy communication can come about have totally been, stuck. And so it's about trying to unstick that. It's trying to kind of break through the barriers. So it's definitely the sons have a hard time communicating with the father, and the father has a hard time communicating with his son. So the book is kind of an exploration of that, and also the way men tend to communicate or don't communicate very well.
I can understand how that would go about. And I noticed that you do say that they have a hard time, of course, coming from that. But would you say that any love is still there between the father and his son?
I mean, I think they're both looking for acceptance from each other. So I think that the sons are looking for, some sort of validation from their dad, that their dad, has, values them in some way. And I think that the father is looking to his sons to try to seek forgiveness for maybe not being the world's greatest dad, for not being there when they were younger. And so I think via his relationship with the youngest son, Andy, he's trying to bring the older two boys back into the fold in some way, and to say, I want you to help take care of Andy, which in a way is helping take care of him. I mean, I think there's definitely underlying love there. At least I hope there is.
And is there something that the reader can expect from the novel, maybe a hidden message lying within the story that you want the reader to take from the story?
I mean, it's all about, families and how families become what they become, how behavior can kind of get stuck, and you kind of are trapped in the way you think of someone else. But it's also about writing. It's about the writing life. It's about novels and how novels can take, a family and turn it into a fiction, and then that could have its repercussions on the family itself. So it's kind of, there are lots of like little layers underneath it that hopefully are kind of fun to explore in that subtext of, there's an unreliable narrator, there are letters. So hopefully, when you read it, you can kind of, it's fun on the surface, but you can dig a little deeper in it, and it hopefully keeps on giving in some way.
Do you have any advice for our aspiring authors? We do have many who come to our site and look for advice from fellow authors.
My best piece of advice is advice that I never take, unfortunately, which is just, whatever you're working on, no matter how frustrated you are, no matter how much you just want to run away, just keep on doing it and get it done as quickly as you can. And then go back and start the real business of writing, which is rewriting. I tend to kind of construct a staircase, so every step has to be perfect before I make the next step. But I think if I could change the way I worked, it would be just write as quickly and unconsciously as I can, not worry about, no one's going to see this draft. This is your draft. And then go about working on the actual book. Like you almost have to pretend that your first draft is just really just a detailed outline. But I tend to kind of struggle over every sentence before moving on to the next one, which can make you kind of pull out your hair and question your choice of career.
So it seems it's not always easy writing a book. It just has to take certain steps before you get to the actual finalizing the story and everything. Yeah,
it's just that you can get stuck in trying to make it perfect. You have your idea, and you've done the little outline, and then you just kind of go about it and just trying to get it all down without worrying about how it reads. And then you can see what you have, and then you can see what your book is really about. And then you can start to take those things that interest you that were maybe surprises because you did write it quickly, and you can, maybe put those to the surface more, and the things that don't excite you so much, you can say, well, maybe I should cut that. But it's so time consuming. That's the problem. That's the thing that can really get you down. So any way that you can add speed to it and to turn off your, self-critical side of your brain, is the best way of going about it. And then turn that on when you're doing the rewriting process. And it just takes a little bit of pressure off the writing. And for me, that was always, that's where I do my best work, if I just kind of relax a little bit, but it's just so hard to do.
Do you have anything from the story that the reader might take, whether it's a personal life experience, lesson learned, and anything from the story?
Well, I just, I want them to take away like a feel of New York City, like they've kind of had an experience in which you might live, in Oregon, but you feel like, oh, I've just spent a few days in New York, and that New York is a character. And to take away just, how everyone is kind of struggling to communicate, and from the very old to the very young, and the ways in which we attempt to communicate, and the failures of communication, and those little moments in which actually we do have some connection and how they can reverberate. I want it to be a story, or I want people to take away, spend some time with an interesting family that has a lot of issues going on. And then it's kind of thematically playing with the idea of fathers and sons and legacy and narcissism and kind of just you kind of dip your toes into that world of a J.D. Salinger-esque novelist and his three sons.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us. If there's anything else our editor, Leah, would like to add, I believe that's all the questions I have for you today. Leah?
The Guardian recently said about your book that you have rare quality of being funny without being silly, serious without being solemn, and powerfully moving without being either sentimental or coercive. How does that make you feel hearing something like that about yourself and Sons? It's a pretty powerful statement, and one of my favorite reviews, I think, of your book.
Yeah, I love that review. So gratifying to see someone take your book so seriously, and who, especially a critic you admire, and someone who is saying such nice things. It's also humbling And I always have that attitude, in which I kind of try to explore in the book, is like the David Gilbert who wrote the book is very different from the David Gilbert who's standing in line getting a cup of coffee, So I always think that the David Gilbert who wrote the book is the one who spent, 5.5 years and struggled. And he seems so separate from me that I just see that as not necessarily reflective of who I am, but of this other person who spent all this time writing the book, and otherwise I'm kind of just struggling to figure out what to order for my cup of coffee. It's so humbling, and it's so gratifying too, and a little bit scary, because you're like, oh God, now I have to write another book, and I don't know if, I don't want to disappoint people.
That's the plight of having a successful book, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
So that leads me kind of into my second question. You talk about New York, and certainly the book is set in New York. And New York City is such an important epicenter for writing and writers. What do you think New York means for the writing community?
Well, I think New York is a place that's just, it's in our kind of collective imagination, no matter where you are. And it has such a rich literary heritage that, it can't help but be a character. And I always try to avoid writing about New York because I grew up here, and it seemed like, I didn't want to write just another New York novel. But then I got to a certain age, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna give it a shot. And I think it's just a place where you can come and reinvent yourself, and it's also kind of this crucible of success and ambition, and the arts as well. And the city kind of has been that way for such a long time. It's almost in the collective DNA of the people on the streets. So it's a great place to write about because it's so familiar, yet it's also kind of it has its endless possibilities and endless exploration. You can. I don't think you can ever get bored of writing about New York because there's so many permutations to it, and it is constantly changing, and so it's a fun place to kind of to really try to dig deep into and explore.
Yeah, New York City definitely has a pulse. And, some people when they're writing, they need to seclude themselves, go to an island, or just kind of be alone and away from outside stimuli. Like, are you that kind of writer, or do you need to kind of have that energy around you to kind of get your story out?
I pretty much just hole up and write. So I always had fantasies of being able to write anywhere, but I really have to just write at my little desk in my little office with a tiny window that looks out into a backyard, that looks against another building. There's no view whatsoever. So the energy kind of comes from those excursions outside, especially when you're writing about New York, it's kind of easy to access that, to access the flow of the energy, which is also why it's a pleasure to take New York as a setting, because it allows you to kind of get jazzy with your language, not just because because you think of Fitzgerald and you think of just all those great novels about New York that have such an energy, and it helps to add some energy to your own writing, I think.
All right, David, and I actually have one more question for you. Our website, Book Divas, is known for recognizing hundreds of authors, even thousands of authors, for their books, and we always like to ask them what makes them a book diva, because in our own eyes, a book diva is someone who can write a story, who can come to our site and take something away that's diva-like. Can we ask you what makes you a book diva?
What makes me a book diva? I think, it's just that it's such an opportunity reading a great novel in which you just kind of fall into another world. And I know no other experience in which you can so totally and fully lose yourself if the book is really working well. And it's just that sense of empathy and that sense of fun, there's nothing like it. And so, I'm a book diva because I am so curious about the world, and yet, I'm kind of stuck in New York. But this is, books give me access to so many different kinds of viewpoints and so many different worlds, and it's just, there's nothing quite like it.
And that's amazing. We always appreciate any author that can come into our site and, of course, inspire other authors to continue with their writing career. Would you like to add where our readers can purchase your book and where to get a copy of it?
Well, you can go to any independent bookstore and find & Sons. It just came out in paperback last week. And or you can go to my website, davidgilbertauthor.com, and find a couple of links there in which you can get the book as well.
All right. Well, thank you, David, very much. We really appreciate again you taking the time today to interview us.
Oh, no problem. My pleasure.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you so much.
You too.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.